Okay, we want to keep things on time here. My name is Deb Atwood, and I am the Executive Director of AGREE. And AGREE is housed at the Meridian Institute, where we are now eating and sitting and about to listen to this wonderful panel. I am thankful that we were able to pull this off before a big hurricane. I feel sorry for my friends in North Carolina and South Carolina, but we're all safe and sound. I want to say that this is the first of a series that we are hosting here at the Meridian Institute, and so we hope that you can join us for future discussion series as well. A little bit about AGREE. We are in our 8th year. We are a group of dedicated people representing a cross-sector of the food and agriculture sector, food industry, and we have had major support from leading foundations to accomplish what we have to date. Out of our work, we came up with 7 really important, actually more than 7 important issues and recommendations around fundamental, important matters that relate to the future of food and agriculture. Our work you can find online. We talked about immigration, and we have recommendations regarding that. We talked about research and development, nutrition, international development, regional food systems, and working lands conservation. And today we're going to talk about our working lands work and what it resulted in, which is really important. We have a task force that's been dedicated to this effort around the subject that we will be discussing, the agriculture data, improving productivity while protecting privacy. Peace is something that we firmly believe in, and I think we'll have a very robust discussion today on the subject. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Todd Barker, who will moderate the panel and say more about the task force and the paper that we will be hearing from the authors and people that are involved in the privacy issue here. So with that, Todd, take it away, and again, thank you.
Good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Todd Barker. I'm a senior partner here at Meridian Institute. I've been involved with AGREE since its origins all the way back in 2008, and have been at Meridian for approximately 20 years. Before we get to our panel, I just want to provide a bit of context for what you'll hear. Deb gave you a bit of an overview of the AGREE initiative. I want to focus a bit more on the Conservation Crop Insurance Task Force and the work it's been doing. Again, just to put all this in context. So I'll get to the task force piece here in just a bit, but just for those of you who aren't familiar with Meridian Institute, you're here in our offices, our DC offices. We're headquartered in Colorado. We specialize in helping diverse groups deal with complex and often controversial issues. We work on a broad range of different topic areas. You can see our posters in the entryway. So essentially anything broadly related to environment, food, and agriculture. About 50% of our work is based at the national level here in the United States. 40% is global issues, for example, tropical deforestation. We do extensive work in that domain. And then 10% of our work is very local. That might be Western watershed work here in the U.S., for example. So that's just a little bit about Meridian. Several of my Meridian colleagues are here. The AGREE task force members, just so you know, if you could raise your hand if you're a member of the task force. So we've got several task force members here, so if you've got questions, unanswered questions at the end of the event, feel free to reach out to any of them or see me at the end. I would note that we have a webinar going right now. We have people who are dialed in remotely. And those individuals, if you have questions, we're going to hold questions until all 5 panelists are through their comments. But if you have questions, for those of you who are on remotely, you can send those via Twitter at AgreeAgPolicy, or you can submit questions through the Adobe Connect interface and the comment feature. See if there are any other logistics. I think most people found restrooms are out past the elevators and around the corner if you need to do that at any point. Any other just logistics? Yeah, microphone, and I'll remind panelists, if you're not speaking, we'll ask you to mute your microphones. And for those of you on the phone, if you can also be muted, that would be helpful so So let me just quickly kind of give you a sense of the flow here. After a few more comments from me, I'll introduce the panel. They're going to go one by one. As a reminder to our panelists, approximately 5, 6, 7 minutes each. We want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions from all of you and from those of you who are on remotely. And I'll circle back to the panel before we adjourn with any closing comments or reflections. So we want to create plenty of opportunity for questions and discussion with those of you who are here. So let me just say a little bit more about the Agree Conservation Crop Insurance Task Force to put all this in context. The task force has been very actively engaged for over 5 years now. I think there are approximately 25 or 30 members. I'm not going to go through all the members. It's a very diverse group. The task force members are listed on the Agree website and the dedicated page we have for the task force. And the work is really focused, I would describe it in kind of 3 areas. One is a significant focus on agricultural data. And of course, today's panel is focused particularly on issues around privacy. Essentially, the task force believes that there's significant opportunities for enhanced agricultural data analysis capacity and capabilities, and that additional capacity and capabilities can help improve profitability of operations, gives farmers better information by which to make decisions, and save taxpayers money, and can strengthen the crop insurance program. And we'll hear a lot more about that over the course of the discussion. And then we've also had a stream of work focused on addressing administrative issues. We use that term for shorthand, but it's issues, for example, as cover crop termination rules. The task force kind of identified issues. We commissioned research that was peer-reviewed and published. We published our own point of view papers. And the group then developed a set of 15 consensus recommendations, which are the basis for advocacy and lobbying efforts. Those consensus positions were encompassed in the Senate version of the Farm Bill in 3 different places. There's just quickly refer to those. So the section 12504 is focused on data on conservation practices. The section 11107 is focused on cover crops and cover crop termination rules and that set of issues. And there was also a provision in the bill around expansion of performance-based discount for conservation practices. So those recommendations have found their way into the Senate bill. Of course, we all know that the conference committee process is ongoing, which we're tracking very closely. And assuming we get a farm bill, then we'll focus on implementation of those provisions, we hope. The third area, so the first area on agricultural data, second area is on the administrative issues, and the third is we continue to identify and explore new areas or issues. And the discussion series, the Agree discussion series, this is the first in a series of events over the course of the fall and the winter, will touch on some of those issues. We're looking, for example, at issues relating to banking, credit, and finance and the intersection of conservation. We're looking at opportunities for improving data collection methods at USDA that can, again, streamline activities at USDA and reduce the burden on producers who are subject to many data requests from USDA and elsewhere. All this work that we're doing is really focused on analyzing and using large data sets. So we're going to have a session that really digs into big data, and we're going to have a session that focuses in particular on how smaller farmers and producers can benefit from big data and data analytic capabilities. We're also doing some work in an exploratory way on pasture, rangeland, and forage products. Our overarching mission of the task force is to support broader adoption of conservation practices, and that those products have somewhat uneven adoption rate. We're interested in seeing, trying to understand why that is and what can be done to support producers who are interested in those products. And we're going to also be doing some further work and discussion around whole farm revenue protection product and the NAP product, the non-insured crop disaster assistance program, and how those 2 programs work together. So those are all kind of early stage activities that are kind of taking place among task force members, and we're commissioning some papers on a subset of those topics to focus for some of the discussion series topics that are coming up. Let me see, what else do I want to mention before we start? Heather, Deb, anything that you want to? Okay. I think with that, let me transition then to introducing our panel. This has been an issue that we've spent a significant amount of time over the last several years focusing on the issue around agricultural data and the very legitimate and real concerns that producers and others have around data privacy. For those of you who haven't seen it, two of our panelists, Laurie Ristino and Todd Janzen, co-authored a paper for us on this topic. There are copies available here. There are also copies available on our website. If you haven't taken a look at this, please do. It's been very well received in our discussions in the Farm Bill of Deliberations. So I encourage you to take a look at that paper if you haven't already. So let me just briefly, you have bios for the panelists. I'm not going to go through extended bios, but I wanted to just highlight a few points about this awesome panel we have here. So Todd Janzen I'll start here from your right to left, is president of Janzen Agricultural Law and the administrator of the Ag Data Transparent Project. You'll hear more about that as we get into the panel discussion, and some of Todd's comments will touch on that. Next, we have Knoth, who's the executive director of the Kentucky Corn Growers Association, Kentucky Small Grain Growers Association. I would note she served the Kentucky Farm Bureau before she took on that role for 18 years. And I also have the pleasure of working with Laura and others in Kentucky and Tennessee on a new project looking at cover crops, rye commercialization, and a link to bourbon, beer, and bread industry. So even a more exciting topic to talk about than agricultural data and privacy. Kevin Barnes, we're really pleased to have Kevin with us today. Thank you for making time. He's the Associate Administrator of NASS. And I would note, you can see in his bio, 35 years of service with NASS. So we have someone here with deep expertise, and really looking forward to hearing Kevin's comments. Laurie Ristino, someone I've known for quite some time, is a visiting scholar at George Washington University Law School. She was the inaugural director of the Center for Ag and Food Systems at Vermont Law School, and she served as senior counsel at USDA, advising NRCS and USDA for 20 years? 20 years. So again, someone with significant experience on this set of issues. And least but not last, Bruce Sherrick, who's become actively involved in task forces work over the last year. He's a professor at University of Illinois, and I would note among his many affiliations, he serves on the board of Farmer Mac. So we have an outstanding panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing comments. Again, just a reminder, I'm going to let each of them go through their comments, and then if you've got questions, please just hold those, and when they're done, I'll open up for questions from the audience or from those of you on the phone. So, agree, colleagues? Missing anything? Dad? Okay. Todd, can I start with you? Or I guess we have an order, don't we, on the slides? Yeah, sorry. Yes. Yep. You're good. If red is on, I know it's counterintuitive.
Okay, so it's on. I'm on.
Yeah, you're good.
All right. So I want to say, I really want to thank Meridian Institute and Degree for inviting me and including me in this project. It's something that I feel pretty strongly about, and so it was a great pleasure to work with Todd Janzen on this paper. I'm the first speaker because I'm going to kick off the topic. Just give an overview. I probably won't use my allotted 5 or 6 minutes because I'd like to get into the details, but I'll be happy to pitch in as we move forward. So, the first question is, why are we even talking about ag data? Why does it matter? It seems like a boring topic, but as you probably know, it's incredibly important. It's really having, broad and comprehensive as well as usable data sets at the USDA is incredibly important to run efficient farm bill programs to improve productivity and conservation outcomes for several really important reasons. One is just basically improving program administration, what works and where does it work, and that requires a level of granularity of data that is incredibly important. Another really important reason is to provide a good return on the public's investment. As you might know, under the Farm Bill, the American public is spending really, billions of dollars of public, or the federal government is spending billions of dollars of public monies on the various Farm Bill programs. So how can we use that investment not only in food security in America, but in conservation and other things, healthy rural economic economies in a better way, the more efficient and effective way. And we can do that by using big data, essentially. And then the other reason that's so important is to help ensure a food secure future, which as extreme weather events, we're going through one right now. In fact, some of us are hoping to get out of D.C. before anything happens here weather-wise. But this is now the norm. Extreme weather, the precip line is really moving further east, the west and the middle west, and parts will be just getting drier. So how do we use our resources more effectively, especially given the fact that we use extreme weather events and we also have global population growth? We need to produce more on the same amount of arable land with limited resources. And how we do that really is through big data and being smarter with the resources that we have. So the unfortunate news, though, is that the USDA has a lot of data, which is great, and it has a lot of experience collecting data and maintaining it, but it doesn't always do so in an integrated fashion and in a way that those big data sets are usable and the way that we really need to be able to use that data for really a modern American food and farming system. So how can we improve that and have integrated data sets that are usable so that we know how to better deploy our resources under the Farm Bill and other programs to help farmers be more productive, to do better, as well as to increase productivity with our limited resources. And then the other thing, though, and this was mentioned really briefly by Todd, is that there is this concern, and when I was a senior counsel, I can attest to this, by producers, and it's very understandable that there are privacy considerations. What is the federal government going to do with our information, and how do we know, how can we be assured that that information that's personal to us will remain private? And the good news there, though, is, and that my colleague Kevin will be speaking to that, is that USDA has a track record of maintaining privacy on its data sets. And we actually have several examples that Todd and I put forth in the paper. And just to go over them briefly, because I think they're important, and Kevin will be speaking to probably one of them in particular, the Forest Service has an inventory of private forested lands across the country, which is incredibly vital because actually a huge amount of forested land in America, North America, is privately owned. And it maintains privacy on those data sets. It's used by both landowners themselves who have forestry land as well as others to accomplish research, which is incredibly important. NASS has the Agricultural Resource Management Survey, or ARMS, and that is also very important to know how resources are being used in agricultural production, and to be able to do further research and understand and make projections. And NASS has that down to a very fine science, and that information I can also attest to is quite secure. I used to work in the South Building, and it had a whole separate floor, you had a separate ID, and be buzzed in. So the USDA has been in this business for quite a while. And then the other example that I wanted to highlight was RMA, the Risk Management Agency, and that agency was mandated by Congress to reduce fraud through a particular statute. So it works with actually an institution of higher learning that it contracts with to use big data to figure out where there's been fraud in terms of insurance policies. And so that has worked out quite well, and privacy has also been maintained, producer privacy in that instance too. So to sum, privacy is an important issue. I do think there's a track record of the USDA of dealing with that, and I also think there's a lot to gain. And in fact, we need to make these gains when it comes to harnessing the power of big data to stay really up to date with what's going on in industry. Industry is moving far ahead from federal government, and we have a public trust to uphold, as well as really ensuring a food secure future. Really requires us to harness that power of big data.
Thank you, Todd, and I really appreciate being asked to be here today. And it was an honor to work on this paper with Laurie. So I got pulled into this project, I believe, because I'm a private practice attorney, and I work with a lot of farmers, a lot of agribusiness, and a lot of my work is in the ag tech sector. And so I end up consulting a lot with these companies that are already collecting data and have to address these same issues that farmers are bringing to them. So in my few minutes here, I thought I'd talk about how private industry is responding to these data privacy concerns that farmers have. And it's no secret, I think there's probably people on the panel can attest better to this than I can, that farmers do have concerns with letting go of their data because, if they give it to a private company, they don't always know necessarily what that company is going to do with it. And the contracts that these farmers review before they sign off on that are not always easy to understand and sort of foreign to what a farmer is used to reviewing. And so there is certainly a lot of concern about that. And I don't feel like in the United States we necessarily have a legal framework that is built to protect this information. We certainly have a trade secret law in this country that protects certain formulas or recipes, equations, things like that, but it's not necessarily something that applies to the recipe for how a farmer makes his crop every year. And so you look at that, you look at our other intellectual privacy laws, there really isn't anything that we have on the books that you could say protects that farmer's privacy unless the farmer safeguards it themselves. So how's the industry responded to this? Because there's a lot of money going into ag tech right now, and that's one of the big hurdles these companies have to overcome in order to get farmers to let go of this information and put it in their data analytic platforms. One of the ways was in 2013, 2014, there was an effort to come up with a set of guidelines, core principles for how companies should use data. And this culminated in November 2014 with a paper called the Privacy and Security Principles for Farm Data, what I call the Ag Data Core Principles. And it was led by, American Farm Bureau, National Farmers Union, and commodity organizations at the national level, and very widely accepted by the industry. So after that happened, the next thing that occurred was an effort to create a certification built around these core principles. And I'm fortunate to be the person who works on that certification. And so we have companies come to us through this project called the Ag Data Transparent Effort, and we certify that their contracts with farmers meet the standards set forth in the core principles document. And we've had 17 companies sign on to this and go through the certification process, including some big names like John Deere and Growmark, Bex Hybrids, and then some small ag tech companies as well. So that's one way I feel like industry has created their own set of guidelines to make sure that it adheres to and addresses the farmers' privacy concerns. The other way that industry does this is through anonymization and aggregation of data. And so there are ways that, of course, you can strip out of data the personal information so that you're still left with data sets that have valuable information for researchers or people doing data analytics, but yet doesn't have that traceability back to the original farmer that created it. And so that's something that I think almost every data collection company does at some level. The other way that you address the concern would be then to restrict who has access to that data. And We see that in the contracts that these companies have with farmers. They say, they make a promise that we don't let anyone into our data sets unless you, the farmer, agree to this. And then they also can control who has access by saying, if you want to use our data set, you come to us. We provide the data back to you without actually giving you access to the data set itself. And so as a result of these efforts, I do feel like we are at a point where we're starting to see pretty widespread adoption by farmers of a lot of these data collection tools that are out there on the market. And you just look at the number of dollars that are going into these products, it's pretty amazing. It shows that industry certainly sees that there's a real future in data collection. And I feel like as the ag data collection platforms that are out there are still at sort of maybe a toddler or kindergartner first grader level as far as becoming a mature industry. And where I think this paper really addresses a lot of these issues is that we don't want this industry to evolve to a point where it is an adult, and in the senior years of its life, when it's too hard for USDA to still be involved and develop its own understanding for the data sets that are out there. So that's why I say on the screen, this ag data collection, it is a thing that's happening. It's going to be more robust in the future, and either USDA embraces this or it gets left behind and private industry does its research on its own.
Great, thanks, Todd. Okay, I'm going to turn to Kevin, I think, next.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Todd and Rex and all the organizers for giving us the opportunity to be a part of this. I guess after what I've heard, I guess I could have put a big slide that said ditto. And that would pretty much speak to it. I want to start first of all by thanking, we just completed the collection of the census of agriculture here in the last of July. And so I want to thank, I know some producers in the room, thank all the producers who respond to that survey, that collection, as well as thank all the folks who supported NASS in this effort. Todd introduced me as having 35 years and then a level of expertise. I don't know. I've been around so long. I guess I'm kind of like the farmers insurance guy. I just, know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. It's about what it amounts to. And I guess I speak more to the. I want to highlight first that our mission, what the NASS mission is. We always start with that. NASS provide timely and accurate and useful statistical service to U.S. agriculture. And we basically, as a statistical organization, focus on the key principles of a statistical organization, which is relevancy, credibility, trust, and independence. And that trust piece is the key piece here, and I think that's what we talk about when we talk about the privacy issue, because the public trust is paramount to us being able to not only collect that information, I don't care what means it's collected by, whether it's by traditional means or some of the new web tools and all that we're trying to implement now to collect this information. But producers are really concerned about the trust factor. And one of the things I think as an organization, NASS, that I've been with so long that we've done, is we have established a level of trust among producers out there. When you look at response rates that we have on surveys, even though they're declining, they're still higher than most organizations, private or public, that collect this type of information. And this definition of public trust here is it's the degree to which the public believes that an entity, business or government, will act in a particular manner because the entity has included the public interest or their interest into its own. And I think that is key. So for us, the confidentiality, integrity, and trust are just critical to maintain this information. I don't think you can argue the value of having robust data sets and having data from different sources integrated so that they're more valuable and useful. But of course, the more valuable you make a data set, you can build a pot of gold, and everybody wants that data set. The other thing that challenge there is that it creates a level of granularity in the data that provides a profile of a producer, because you can overlay so much information. No matter if you remove the personal information, there's enough factors there and so there's a challenge to protecting that information. And I think I just want to say that NASS has a track record of that. In our core values, we also include trust. We keep out, and I think that's been emphasized, that we keep data confidential. We bring in folks to our lockup, and if you haven't been to a NASS lockup, I invite you to come in to a NASS lockup and experience that and see the care that we take in protecting and securing the information that we collect. I think it would be great. We're open, and we have hundreds of visitors to that lockup every year to go through that process. And we value that. We're very proud of what we've done with that. And so I don't know that I have anything to add here to what's been said, except to say that I know that NASS has the track record of keeping data secure. And we think that the biggest challenge going forward in this effort is going to be able to assure the public or the data providers, particular producers, like producers, of which I'm a son of the protection of this information. Because, the quality of the data is only as good as what you can collect and the information you pull together. And I will mention that NASS, we're looking at several initiatives. One, we know it's taxing to collect information from farmers the traditional way. Farmers don't like to answer phones anymore. Neither do I. I screen all my calls. Filling out paper questionnaires become laborious for people to do. And so we've expanded more and more web data collection, and we want to try to get our producers, encourage producers out there to utilize that tool to report that information. And the other thing that we're looking at is also, there are opportunities to not collect farmers and collect this data from other sources as well. But then therein lies the challenge of the quality assurances that you can place on information that you collect from the data integrity issues. So there are challenges here, but we support what this group is trying to do, and just want to highlight some of the challenges going forward from our perspective.
Great, thanks, Evan. And that last set of issues actually will be a significant focus for our November 8th event, and we have a paper that's in the works on that sort of topic, so I look forward to working with you on that set of issues. Okay, so I'm going to turn to Laura next.
Thanks, Todd. Nice to see everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of the panel. I was asked to kind of give that farmer perspective. So I'm a farm kid, and my husband and I also raise beef cattle, about 75 mama cows, and a few hundred acres of grain crops, and mostly hay. But come to you with thoughts from my leadership on both data in general and then on the privacy of that data. So I guess I wanted to start out with just the whole concept of it is farmers are paying for tons of data. So one, they're paying for it. I wanted to make sure that was part of the opening statement. And two, there's tons of it. But that means that there's multiple platforms. So with multiple platforms come a lot of inconsistency. So, all the big companies have tech services. And you can use that when you're in your tractor or in your combine or in your grain elevator. And depending on who's driving the combine that day or the tractor that day, everything, all of that plays into those inconsistencies and all of that data that you seem to farmers at this point, they'll tell you that they bought in. As the companies come to them, and usually it comes with a discount. If you want to use their service, they'll give you a discount, and you can turn onto this concept of allowing them to then use your data. Of course, we all know they're using that data to then sell you more technology and more products, But so one of the things that I also want to make a point of is, that transformation of all that data into profits got to be greater than the cost of it. Especially with today's prices. I mean, 10 years ago, these guys were going gangbusters. They were putting on digital gadgets on everything that they had on their farm operation. Right now, profit margins are to the point that these guys have got to be providing them the discounts or something for them to be able to use some of this technology. And the point is that, all this data alone is not science. Not the data alone is not science. Usually what it ends up is just a bunch of stuff that you've got as reports and readouts and things that you've got there in your farm shop, but it needs to be turned into something useful. And so things like, and not all the science beyond that has caught up with, has caught up, like on the conservation measures. I wanted to, as an example, cover crops. We want cover crops. I mean, that is a big push with NRCS and others, and we all understand how that can be a useful at the farm level and protective of the environment and good for the public. But we push for cover crops, but we don't really know seeding. What's the seeding rate? What does it do to next year's crop? And there's real reasons for sometimes not using a cover crop. I mean, and on your climate, depending on your disease, issues, your bugs, and obviously the cost. And so as we talk about the need for the data and protecting the data, I guess I just wanted to interject that our farmer's perspective is that it needs to be useful. It needs to be something that helps them make a profit. And then, obviously, there's concern for privacy that's very real. So, like they'll tell you that these yield monitors are great in your combine. You're watching this and you're seeing all this fabulous data, but does that turn it into a better yield for next year? What are you going to do with that stuff? Variable rate nitrogen. It sounds good, but does it correlate to yield? And how much does it cost me to have that extra technology and that company come in and do it for me because I don't have that equipment to do it? So I guess that's the point is we're not really at that point of making it where it equals the profit for the farmer. I mean, I don't remember who said it. It was, again, a ditto, that we're definitely in the infancy of turning data into useful things for the farmers. And one of the things, one of my board members is a young guy, and he just thoroughly engages in the technology and data. I mean, his office, his little farm office, was like, Starship. I mean, it's got monitors that he can see everything that's happening at all times. But what Josh says is, with the privacy of this stuff, you got to think about, though, if it was really worth a lot of money, you would hear stories about farmers' networks being hacked. They're not. We may have a lot of data, and privacy is a concern, but right now you're not to a point where it is something that, for the farmer, becomes something that is, a useful product, sellable product. I know there was talk about aggregating the data, and I know, farmers are inundated for a request for data. Like you were saying, we've got to find the right way to ask them. We all find NASS data useful. It's very difficult to get it out there or get the data pulled in the right way. But I guess when you look at the technology data that's coming through at the grower level, aggregate data may be easy, but is it always useful to the farmers? So there's some more hurdles that you need to get past. So like predicting for the farmer what he needs is a lot harder than predicting for the average. So this planter technology that is being sold by one company, John Deere, for an example. So there's, in the aggregate, half of the farmers love that system, love it. The other half hate it. Well, that's an average, right? So, again, aggregated data, from a farmer perspective, that's the way we look at it. And I guess, too, is the data scalable? And I think that's been one of the things that's talked about. I mean, how is it useful? Of course, from our perspective, it needs to be useful first for the farmer. And then at the county level, because decisions are made there through FSA and NRCS and others, and then at the state level, and then for the nation. So I guess scalability for us is a big issue for data. And as I turn to thoughts on privacy of that data, I mean, farmers, it's just, I guess, and every one of them, they are offended at the idea of being spied on and exploited. They feel like everybody wants to know what they're doing, and feel like they have, they want to get into their business and want to know about it. So you have to start with premises. They want privacy because they feel it's on them, and you have to look at it too. But we also recognize it's like a copyright. If you don't stand up for your data, you could lose it, and that's not right. And then at this point in time, farmers aren't quite sure how that's all going to work. So what you all worked on as far as that list of questions that farmers should ask every time before they sign those contracts is so important. And we've got to share this with more farmers to make sure that, because like my chairman of my corn board was saying, it's like he sees the concept. He gets it, why it is useful and important and can be helpful not just to him but to others. But he's very anxious about it. He is concerned about how that can happen. And I put in there about all farming is local, because farmers got to have that right of privacy for a whole bunch of reasons. And I just kind of jotted down the ones that I thought kind of stood out the most. One, if they can't do things on their farm to innovate in privacy, then they won't. If they can't, they don't have the privacy to check out a hunch, try something, to innovate. That's one of the reasons why you don't want everybody to know what you did this year on your crop. I mean, that's part of that secret sauce that goes into making their farmers feel like they've done better for their farms, because of competition, and it's very real in farm country. Competition with your neighbors and on rented ground, because as y'all know, I mean, you don't own everything you farm. You rent ground. Competition for ground is serious out in the country. So you want to be able to protect that. You want to be able to have protection of that data privacy, and you want to be able to share it with the researcher. You should be able to do that and learn things from what you're doing at your farm. You don't want to get this information out there and scare your banker with a false narrative. Your relationship with your banker is very, very important. We are concerned about unnecessary regulation that could come from data when it's misinterpreted. Also, just citizen lawsuits or just bad publicity in the neighborhood. Like one of my board members was saying, is like, what if there's just numbers thrown out there that they say, well, you use many thousand pounds of a product. What's my neighbors going to think when they don't understand what that means? They think, oh, that's going to my water. Did that, so privacy is very important from those perspectives. So I guess ownership, again, I've just mentioned privacy issues are real, and I think that the farmer that does the work, takes the risk, owns the land, he should own his data. I think, and I'll skip ahead a little bit. I think, though, that there's an opportunity, and sorry if I'm speaking too long. I think it should become something that is valuable to the producer for his bottom line. It should be his data. And he should be able to maybe even possibly turn that into something on his balance.
All right. Thanks, Laura. All right. Bruce.
Thanks, Todd. In the interest of time, I'll jump right into this. Well, I think one of the important things is simply getting a definition around what we need. So if I said big data and asked each of you what it meant, you'd get about as many answers as there are people in the room. So we haven't fully identified and come to a singular definition. Many people, especially, and I was asked to some degree address this from a commercialization perspective. Excuse me. Big data generically at least gets referred to data sets that occur at higher frequency or higher resolution than their prior generation. So image processed data sets are really flying around and exploding now and becoming very valuable. But again, representing the panel as well here, we have three kinds of big data sets at least. One would be survey response data. And those become big only when you track them through time or have some longitudinal factor. So crop insurance is one of the notable ones because we have a lot of producer records embedded in the APH histories and other products at RMA. That's a gigantic resource that were used and possible to use, but it's, of course, difficult to use. Another one is what I would call event data, so machine log data. We all have monitors in all of our devices now, in our cars that track how we drive, and our combines the speed we were going, and the soil moisture. So event data is another layer. And the third layer is meta layers, or things like weather and soil. You put those all together, and they become a big data platform that somebody can operate on. And the question, of course, for industry is cost-benefit. Very clearly, if it's worth more than it costs, it's worth doing with the hurdle or threshold of doing it. So it's a fairly bland analysis. I worked with several of the ag tech companies, including Granular. Granular has stood up and released acre value, for example, so you can look in the sky at virtually every acre in the country, find out what was planted there for the last 5 years using crop cover data. Who the ownership records are, also public. Lots of stuff from soils, also public. And a lot of things that are processed from satellite imagery that historically are hard to get, but are also technically public. So to those points, to some degree, it's like, please don't give us your data. We already have it. We standardize it. I don't need you to give me certain information that I'm going to have to recode. That actually changes the value, though, of the event data the producer has. That becomes part of the long-running natural experiment. So I'll go through a couple of points that I think are really critical to think of and just represent my somewhat casual perspective on it. But from the private side, the companies are incredibly nervous about headline risk and incredibly protective and have invested as much as is possible. TIA, for example, has billions of dollars of farmland. They want their landlords and their tenants' information to be absolutely sacrosanct. They want to behave according to responsible principles, because the cost to them, once you've aggregated that size position of the violation of it, is very, very high. Okay? Number two, I'd say I'm going to skip a little ahead. Consumer demand for information that goes backwards through the information channel is really exploding. We want to know, the joke from like Portlandia, we want to know if our chicken was happy, right? We want to know, but if you turn over a Driscoll box of berries and scan the QR code, and could trace it back to the square of the field that it was produced on, when it was picked, and the channel that it got to you in. That's really valuable big data as well. So the demand from the consumer and the willingness to pay for an attribute that you can get from a reverse transmission in the data system is also what's driving a lot of these big data systems. It's not just, can I put on more nitrogen where the soil is a little deeper? Farmers are really good agronomists. Generally, no. These are not that hard of a decision. But should I be growing corn with a thicker waxy layer because someplace 6 months from now around the world we're going to run out of feed for a particular livestock unit, we'll have too much corn and ethanol hits? That's a good use of the data. Okay? So when it begins to affect behaviors in a way that's valuable, I think that's really good. The definition of privacy, likewise, on the other side, I think has also evolved dramatically. I just checked, and I also checked yesterday. I have 44 apps that know where I am. I didn't think about that until we were asked to address this, but millennials' definition of privacy is really quite different. So they want you to snapping phone pictures all day long where they are, and the albums on your iPhone all organized against the faces that it can find that they think are related and the location you were in when you took the picture. So from a producer perspective, I think the definition of privacy also has to catch up. It has to become somewhat compatible with the things that have uniqueness or value or protection and the things that don't. Simply knowing what your yields were as you drove across the field on a combine used to be really valuable. Frankly, it's just in my way now. If somebody's going to include that in the machine data to give me, I already have soils, weather, a crop practice history. I really don't want to know your badly measured, badly calibrated yield monitor. I want to know the meta experiment. So my last point is that the natural experiment that's occurring is only valuable if it's aggregated. So the farmers are planting whatever they're planting, and they have far greater variation in weather outcomes across 1 million different seed trials than any seed company could do in carefully managed plots. But historically, it wasn't possible to collect and aggregate that natural experiment across all producers. It's becoming possible. If you think about climate and granular and circa, there are likely hundreds of millions of acre years of experiments in that data now. And so the data are only valuable if you can do the analytics around it, come up with information that's different than you could have gotten from the individual. And while I appreciate that half the farmers like or don't like it, all the farmers still bought the seed, right? So there is also a reveal of preference here. And when you put that together, you can deduce things that you didn't used to be able to get from the data set. Now, is that valuable? Of course. Who owns it? I don't know. Is it the analytics engine that added value? Is it the data? Is it some combination of both? And big businesses basically said, we'll use markets to figure that out. We can sell it to you, and you buy it. It must have been worth that. If you refuse to buy it, it probably wasn't worth that. And at some point, we'll get to a resolution where the stuff all grows up. The last little point, this monetization versus commercialization goes in other dimensions as well. We all, many of us use like a shopper value card where the scanner data from things we purchased through time gets put into an algorithm to decide what flyer to send us. But there are other great cost-reducing things too. They don't send you flyers for things you aren't going to ever buy. So there's also absence of expense because of the ability to look at things. I had a roof redone lately, and I called the place for a bid. While we're on the phone, they used Google Earth and some other imagery from the street to figure out the slope of my roof and the square footage and gave me a bid. That was really cool. I didn't have to wait for them to come out, go back home. Same thing happened with a lawn care company, and this one was a little more disturbing. They called to try to sell me some extra service that I didn't want, and I said, but I have this little rental property. I need to get some weeds taken care of. And the guy says, oh, the one at 1604 and the one at 3101. Okay, now that's a little intrusive, but yes, the one at 1604, well, this is what it will cost. So there are those kinds of privacy issues as well, where there is the cross-validation of data sets that we sometimes forget is happening all around us all the time as well. And they can be of great value, but that's another part of the definition of privacy that I think we need to wrestle with. So with that, I see that I'm last and least.
Last and least, yes, no. Yes, okay, well, thank you all very much for your comments. That was great. I just have a couple quick comments, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, and including for folks on the phone listening in. So one is, we've talked a lot about this set of issues, and I really appreciated the kind of specificity and granularity of your comments and reflections. I learned some new things just listening to you. The kind of buckets that we hear about, they're very, very real, legitimate concerns here. And I appreciated how you unpacked that issue further for us. And again, I picked up a few new issues of listening to you. Also, the specificity around the kind of track record that exists at USDA and elsewhere and what the industry is doing to protect privacy and how it's been protected over the years. That's not always the case, but in this domain, I certainly appreciated the perspective. And then, we hear a lot about the return on investment. This is not an insignificant investment that farmers are making in terms of collecting data, sharing data, responding to surveys. And I think some people are starting to see kind of what the benefits are and could be, but I think as Laura alluded to, may not be quite there yet. And so I think part of this is kind of how do we advance this whole issue so that there can be more benefit back to producers and taxpayers and the agencies. So with that, let me open it up for questions. Anything you heard from the panel or your own comments or reflections. And I would also say, fair game if you have questions about how what you heard intersects with the work of the task force and some of the recommendations that's advanced in the Farm Bill negotiations. So we'd like, yes, Robert. And if you could introduce yourself, and we need a microphone, right? So that, I'm going to repeat the question. Yeah, so Robert, it's...
Thank you all for being here. Very good panel, very good information. I agree wholeheartedly. We need this. As a grower, the biggest issue definitely is that data security and privacy, whether it's real or not. And anyone, this is addressed everybody on the panel, if the farmers would pay for their data, if they would be paid privacy,
So just, I'm going to repeat the question so folks on the phone can hear. That's Robert Blair from Idaho, producer. The question is essentially if producers were paid for their data, would the issues around privacy be the same? So any panel member care to respond to that? And so please take your microphone. Todd?
Sure, I'll jump in here. I think that would certainly go a long ways towards addressing a lot of the concerns, because if you're getting paid for data, then you certainly are more understanding, or will give the person who's buying it more freedom to use it than if it is something that they just take and you don't know what happens to it. So that's my 2 cents.
Others? Laurie?
Yeah, if you receive benefits stuff from the USDA, then isn't it kind of a bargain that in return for this, that we need this, but by the way, we're not going to share it with others? That's often the way it is with Farm Bill programs. It's like in lieu of this, then you give information in exchange. So there is some remuneration. It might not always be seen that way because it's in the form of a public benefit, but it is because it costs money.
Okay. Kevin? How do you feel about this?
Well, I can tell you from our experience, we've tested this once, of course, with some incentives we offer for the arm survey, gas cards, credit cards, or whatever it was. And I think I can't give you the percentage, but a high percentage of those incentives will return or not used. And my question would be, how much? Because what I've heard from some producers is that you can't pay me enough for my time. And so some felt that was kind of an insult to offer such a little amount of money as an incentive, and I would agree. But we're limited in what we can do. So, I mean, how much is enough, and how much value do we place on that? Is a big question. And the other thing I think that's been mentioned is, and the question was asked, who benefits from this data? Who gets to benefit this? And one of the things that I think that we try to emphasize, communicate, share promotions and whatever to farmers to participate in the survey is the benefit, the indirect benefit of providing this data. The whole reason we do what we do, stabilize commodity market in this country, and it's critical. And it's for the greater good. And so really you participate not only in the greater good, it's not a personal benefit, but it's a benefit for the entire agricultural community.
So, Robert, I know you well enough to know that even though that was a question, you must have a point of view on this. So, well, let me ask, what's your point of view on this? And then I'm going to go to Dave back here who's got his hand up.
And there is a difference between private data and data for the government. And I think I agree with you on your point there, Todd, with on the private side, if there was a monetary incentive, it would be less of an issue. From a government perspective, the data, like I said, I'm checked out, no problem there. My data is actually, I think, more valuable and could have a better incentive from farm programs, let's say from an insurance standpoint, as a rate reduction, because I can prove I am beating weather issues. And so why am I being lumped in with everybody on a county average or paying a higher premium when I am less of a risk? And so I think there's some benefits for that, and both Kevin and Laurie, you address that as there is an incentive there. And I know we're a long way, but those privacy issues are still a concern, even though I am gaining a monetary benefit. And I think that would break barriers down, and I look at USDA programs as the carrot to pull agriculture into adopting precision ag and data more. Thank you.
Thanks. I figured you had something to say on that. Thanks. Dave, back here. Can you introduce yourself, please? I know who you are.
Dave Gagne, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So my question is actually almost across the board. one of the things that the foundation has a real challenge with, and we do partnerships with USDA, EPA, 16 different federal agencies. And within those, we do anywhere from $40 to $80 million a year with agriculture. And that is literally on the ground with farmers and ranchers, foresters across the country. Very proud of that. One of the challenges we have with USDA is the Farm Bill language, 1619 language. Laurie, I knew you were going to smile at that one. It's that 1619 language that says it's privacy language, but it's how far does that privacy language stretch? And Laura, I'm going to go back to what you said. Where's the worth to the farmer? The farmer, there's got to be value to them as well on the privacy for releasing the data. And one of the things that we found is the handcuffs that USDA has, at least within FSA and NRCS, have put on for taking that data, compiling it to get some of those data sets, trying to compile them, and they just won't let us do it. It just won't happen. There's a little bit away from crop insurance. It's more on just some of the conservation end of things that we do. But we've had a real challenge with that. And then I look at the university end of it. How can we go and study these things if we're having that big challenge? Yes, I can sign lots of forms. I got an email this week that said, every single dollar of USDA money, make sure we're just reassuring that you are getting a 1619 form signed every single time, aren't you? With every grantee that you use. So I guess my question is where is that happy medium between data that can help the farmers, help their research, help our efforts, both economic, conservation, markets? We've got all these companies now that want it, the Atlanta Lakes or Monsanto, whomever, want to have those data sets for their delivery mechanism. Where's the happy medium? I'm just curious.
Thoughts from our panel? Come on. Laurie? Microphone. Sorry, you need to hit your mic again.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks.
I'll never get used to this red thing. Yeah, 1619. You're not considered a cooperator, though. I mean, there is that exception, and I think sometimes they're narrowly construed. But I would push back on that because as long as you're not giving away that data and it helps you implement for conservation. And I think this goes across both things, both the crop insurance and the conservation, which actually should be better linked, right? So we can actually be more effective with both, as was pointed out by the gentleman back there, which might actually lower your crop insurance payments. So I think that's one of the things that the proposed language in the Senate passed bill tries to do, is that it creates a mechanism for bona fide research for really improving the delivery of Farm Bill programs while still maintaining that privacy, that expectation of privacy. So, but creating a mechanism where that can happen, because clearly the way this is unfolding now, the way 1619 is being interpreted, and as we both worked for NRCS or worked with them, we understand the people in the front lines of those agencies are quite concerned about their own, their own skin. So I don't blame them. But so this avenue that the group is really trying to work with Congress to facilitate would I think be a step in the right direction to allow bona fide research to really improve program delivery while still maintaining privacy, which I think really needs to happen for us to move these programs into a more modern era.
Great, thanks, Laurie. Carl and then Scott. And Carl's got a microphone coming behind.
Oh, you're going to stand there.
Could you introduce yourself?
Carl Mattson, wheat farmer from Montana. I heard quite a bit of discussion about the information that's already available and John Deere and their technology and then aggregation. I come from Montana up along the Canadian border. We have no cell phone service. 3 new John Deere combines that we bought, the technology in there we can't use. So unless Laura had the slide on connectivity. So unless, what I'm questioning is how accurate will our aggregation be if we exclude a part of agriculture? And that would be rural America And more often than not on two-lane highways, you do not have cell phone coverage. And I think there's a real need to address this issue if you plan on depending on the technology that John Deere and others have for an opportunity. But with that, I'll quit.
Thanks, Carl. Bruce?
Clearly, they're evolving at different rates in different locations and for different purposes. While you don't have a cell phone, I still have a picture of your farm. And if I can process that image and come up with correlating information, I can make some use of it. Now, it's not going to be as good as at some point in time when you have much more real-time connectivity. For yield data, the fact that you can collect it while you're harvesting and it can be uploaded later means the lack of that direct connectivity is not necessarily a big problem for the analytics. But in the long run, these are just systems that are evolving. You still call these phones, right? But it's your camera, and it's your news feed, and it's your music system, and it's your map system. It's all these other things as well. I think we're very much in inning 1, 2, or 3 in terms of how this is all going to interconnect and talk. Deere is very aggressive about their Internet of Things kinds of ideas and programs. So I think, for me, broadband access to as much of the world as is possible is a really nice equilibrating kind of feature for a lot of other reasons too, for educational access and for other things too. And agriculture is just one of those, probably not on its own sufficient to fully drive the rate at which we kind of, whatever the REA analog for Wi-Fi is now. I don't think ag will be the primary driver of that, but you make a point. It's not uniform yet, but you should never expect it to be uniform. It won't ever be uniform.
Okay. Anyone else on the panel on that point? Laurie?
I'd just like to quickly say I think that's part of the reason to have this language in the Farm Bill is that it's also assessment too. What are the gaps? Which in some ways what we don't know and assessing that is as important as what we do know. And that can help drive better policy, which is exactly, I think, one of the purposes of this whole, of the whole proposed act, or proposed language.
Okay. Anyone else in the panel? Okay. Scott, and if you could introduce yourself. These are all task force members, so I need some non-task force members to ask some questions. I hear these guys all the time. So.
I'm Scott Marlowe from soon-to-be Waterlogged, North Carolina. And Bruce, this is in part following up on what you just said. And it seems to me that there's sort of 3 levels of data that we're talking about. One is data that a farmer has active control over, which is a survey that they fill out or something like that. Passive control over, which is the equivalent to like stuff links, like my phone tracking where I am, like their stuff that just goes passively. But the third thing that we're talking about here is data that is collected about my farm over which I have no control or interaction or things like that, whether that's from satellite data or I have pointed out to Robert that while he can send a drone over his farm and get lots of information, I can send a drone over his farm and get lots of information too. And so I'm curious from Bruce and others on the panel as we make this transition into a greater and greater data set that the landowner, the farmer or whatever landowner or homeowner or whomever else never has any interaction with, never has a control over, never has anything over. How does that change our expectations in terms of privacy? How does that change our expectations in terms of all of the kinds of issues? That seems to me to be what you're saying is that that's where we're going very, very, very rapidly, and that seems to me to be a jump to warp speed in terms of having to deal with ethical or other issues around it.
Comments?
Sure. I wouldn't have the expertise to comment on the legal, how the definitions, terms, and boundaries on things are evolving in context of changes in what we're generating. But that's actually always been the case. We're just getting better pictures now. So we've always had weather services. Do you complain that they tell you there's going to be rain in North Carolina? That required somebody to fly over a whole bunch of things and aggregate data and come up with a forecast and give you information that was really valuable to you, right? But now we're doing it better. We can tell you when it's going to hit landfall with much more precision, how many inches of rain. Is that a good or a bad thing? That seems like a good thing until you say, yeah, but they looked at well, these are always going to be natural tensions and natural conflicts. And the law may change to be what you can collect from space and what you can't collect from space. But Planet Labs is sending up a whole bunch of little doves and going to have a picture of the entire Earth, sun-synchronous satellites all the time. This is probably a really good thing if it can be used to make better decisions. There will be some people who are unhappy because you found me sunbathing in my backyard or whatever the outcome that you did not. But I didn't, or that I was someplace I didn't want to be known that. There are those kinds of things. But the law didn't address this before. We didn't address cell phones until we had cell phones, or pictures until we had pictures, and satellite imagery. I think it's all part of a natural evolution, and the integration and processing of that. There will be fits and starts of how the legal system keeps up and gets ahead, and so on.
Can I make a
Todd.
comment? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, since the advent of the airplane, I think since the 1940s, there's a Supreme Court case, and we've always said, if you can take a picture from the sky, then it's not really considered private information. So I don't think most farmers probably have an expectation of privacy in things that can be photographed from the sky. Now, drones have thrown a little bit of gasoline on that fire, because you can certainly fly a lot lower than you can with an airplane or helicopter with a drone and take more invasive pictures. But I think it's just, for this group, it's important to remember that, those things that can be collected by anyone, I don't think most farmers have the expectation of privacy on that like they do on those other things that really are proprietary to them, like the secret sauce that Laura was talking about how you make the perfect barley crop that can be made to produce the perfect beer. That's the type of thing that the farmer, I think, sees as something that is their private information, and they do want to keep it private.
We've got a comment over here, but I think this is a really interesting point, because tying it back to something that was said earlier, I mean, there's kind of this cultural evolution around privacy and expectations around privacy. I'm thinking about my 16-year-old daughter on Snapchat all the time with her friends, and then the kind of technology innovation, even though this has been happening, that sophistication in terms of what you can interpret on the ground from remote imaging is advanced significantly. So there is a really kind of cultural and technological intersection here that I think is pretty fascinating to think about. If you could introduce yourself there. Oh, Laurie, did you want to?
Oh, no.
Okay.
I was actually just going to make the point that I think that 1619 and some of the other privacy provisions in the Farm Bill actually probably give producers more privacy than the rest of some of us have, because some of that information that the USDA actually has is stuff that exists out there anyway. So I just wanted to make that point. I do think that there is a different kind of law that applies to producers by virtue of the Farm Bill.
Good, thanks. If you could introduce yourself.
My name's Robert Richardson. Guess I'm just a Missouri farm boy that did data for a few years.
Just a Missouri farm boy.
Yes, sir. So my questions, I got two. The first one would be around something that I heard, which would be data validation and data stewardship. If I'm pulling data from different streams, stepping on it, and then selling it, that's a misrepresentation, to say the least. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know what data does. So what are you guys doing around that? Lawyer-wise, or Department of Agriculture?
Department of Agriculture, at least for NASS, we don't sell the data. Number one. Number two, I would say that's another, and I jotted a note a moment ago about the transparency, because when you get data from various sources, and I mentioned, the challenges with validating quality of that information, first of all, because one of the things I've learned, and you can tell me if this is correct, I've heard, for instance, even on some of the data collection systems on tractors and all that information, those things have to be calibrated. And I know that one of the things I've learned is that if it's not calibrated, it's probably not accurate. And so if I'm grabbing that information and aggregating that data, I'm probably not creating a very adequate data set. And our data that we produce is it has to be accurate because of the impact that it has on the commodity market. So from our standpoint, I mean, we cannot, we'd like to be able to grab data from all these different sources. That'll be great. But the validation piece, as you mentioned, is critical because you have to be able to validate the accuracy of the data. And then, as a statistical organization, one of the things that's required to put error measures around that data and be transparent with the public about the methodology that and the quality of that information. Publish that along with our data, so that presents a real challenge. Should we, fight that? So
before your second question, any other comments around data quality and validation?
Making and losing a lot of money on, from what I hear, data that may or may not be valid. Is that an accurate statement?
I'll speak to private industry. I think that it's certainly like a land rush right now for a lot of these companies that have venture capital to say we've got more acres in our system than anyone else. And so there probably is somewhat of that where they're not so much concerned with the quality of the data. It's just being able to show their investors that they're ahead of the game, collecting more than anyone else. And then, eventually we'll clean the data and we'll work on getting it to a place where it can be accurately used. But at least for now, it's just collect.
Oh, yeah, a little bit of the Wild West. Yep. So second question, then I'll go back here in the corner.
Oh, yes, sir. The second question would have most specifically to Mr. Barnes. Are there any kind of, like, I've been in other industries that have just fired up with computers or data or whatever. One of the things we do is we create model offices, or I guess in your case, a model farm, where you would say, here's how the ideal operation of your data acquisition systems are, here's how you provision that, here's how you would look at it, here's how the farmer would behave 10 years from now looking at all this data. Is there any kind of effort within the Department of Agriculture to look at something like that?
Well, I can't speak for all agencies in USDA, speak for NASS. I mean, we are looking at that from some extent. We just had, for instance, the commission from the National Science Academy, a farm structure panel to look at the changing farm structure because we realize that farms today are not what they were. I always tell everybody, it's not your daddy's farm anymore. The 20-year-old farm. So things have changed. So we're looking at how farms are structured differently. What the ideal farm or how they manage their information, and I don't have the results of all that from that panel yet, but those are some things that we're looking at because again, we're surveying these entities. We can't consider them the mom and pop operations that we used to collecting data and the information because they're so integrated now. It's different from what it used to be. So we're looking at it from that perspective.
So perhaps not as comprehensive as what you might be envisioning, but certainly kind of elements of that. Yeah. All right, thanks. Okay, back here in the corner, and again, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Dan. Excuse me. My name is Dan Silverstein. I'm a private sector advisor in agricultural development. So I deal mostly with developing world countries. I came here to learn. And since you wanted questions from people who aren't on the task force, I'm about to prove to you that I'm not on the task force. As far as I can guess, I'm probably the least knowledgeable person in the room. But there are two, and so I'm not quite sure how to frame these thoughts that are going through my mind. So I ask your indulgence for listening to me for a minute and see if you can add some context to this. There are two phrases that are running through my mind as I'm listening to all of this discussion. One is data dump and the other is value chain. I hear a lot of this talk from you, sir, about the data that you have and someone else has access to. That's basically raw data. That's a data dump. If it required some kind of sophisticated interpretation, then it would start to move through a value chain. Someone would have created coding or some other more sophisticated way to massage the data, and assumably they would charge someone to find out what they discovered from manipulating the data. So with that as a basis, I'm not sure exactly how to frame the question, but it seems to me that it's unusual that the farmer is creating an asset, which we're calling data here, and then someone's coming by and just taking it as though the farmer had grown a crop and someone just came by and took it to a distribution center and sorted it and cleaned it and packaged it and began to create this value chain that then gave it commercial value. Why isn't that happening in any of this? Why are we even having this discussion about the farmer wanting to protect his or her privacy and his or her discovery and his or her asset value, as though there was some greater force in all this that was somehow entitled to this effort, and other people would just come by and make use of it?
I can make one comment and then turn to the panel for any. It's an excellent question. I don't think you're the least informed, knowledgeable person here based on that very sophisticated question. I wasn't thrown off by that. I would say one thing that in response is that some of the data sets that the task force has been focused on are not currently available to researchers and the public for analytical purposes, right? And so I think what I'm hearing is if there was the integration of that data and there was value, why wouldn't it just be kind of being pulled along, if I understood your question to some extent? And part of the challenge right now is that some of those data sets are not easily accessible or available at all to researchers. And so the language that the task force developed and proposed to the Farm Bill proposes some mechanisms to allow qualified researchers, very specific, strong privacy provisions, access to that data to do the kind of analytics that would add value and be of benefit to farmers, the agency, program administrators, to producers, and others. So part of it is just a lack of access to some of that data. But let me turn to the panel who know a lot more about this issue than I do, if anything you would add to what I just said or amend. Todd?
Sure. So just from a privacy or a private sector standpoint, there is at least this model out there. And the company that comes to mind is Farm Mobile, which is a data collection company. And what they promise farmers is, we are going to shop for buyers of your data, and then when we find a buyer, we split the proceeds 50-50 with you. So there is that model out there that says we think that we can return enough value back to you to reward you for giving us the data. And when I think about USDA, I think, well, certainly if a farmer gets a grant, an EQIP grant or something like that to plant cover crops, they're getting something, and to say then that we want to see, did this actually result in a benefit to you, farmer, and to the taxpayer, that seems to make sense. Yes.
I get that.
Okay.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is that Farmer Mobile, what was the name of that?
Farm Mobile.
Farm Mobile, yep, is like a market maker. If you called your stockbroker, he or she would basically do the same thing, which is put the asset out for bid and see if someone wanted to buy it, and if they do, you get the proceeds from it, or you have a deal with them where you get some portion of it. And if no one wants to buy it, then it has no market value, I presume. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, well, I've got my eye on the clock. We are scheduled to wrap up at 1:30, right? That was my colleagues. I'm just making sure. I've been a little off on my days and timing lately. So let me just turn back to our panelists. We've got 5 minutes left. If any of you would like to offer any closing comments or reflections on what you've heard, and then we'll wrap up the session. So maybe I could just start with you, Todd, and move down to Bruce.
Sure. Just to bring it all home, I would say that, we certainly in private industry, we've seen that we're working to address farmers' concerns with data privacy. And, USDA would have the same challenge ahead of it, but I think that it's certainly doable with the right protocols in place.
Okay. Laura?
I guess I appreciated that Bruce kind of laid out all those layers of data, because I realized I kind of jumped between those layers. in discussing it because it was just a train of thought from talking to farmers about data, and every time you talk to a different one, you had a different concept. But our growers for the majority very much appreciate and understand and find useful working with NASS to provide that type of information. And then at that level at the producer level, data, it's interesting. The same farmer who said, well, my data, I've got a lot of data, but it's not all that, not worth a lot of money or I'd be getting hacked. But he also said, if I could get every farmer in the U.S.'s data, I'd sure take it because then you can formula the market. So there is value at that level, and I guess, we've been engaging and we appreciate many of our producers appreciate the whole notion of attaching benefit to conservation measures for the potential for crop insurance, reduction of premiums. We've been working with an RPPP program where you try to put value to conservation measures, and I think that is useful. That would become data and information for other growers to be shared. But we're paying those guys.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks, Laura. Kevin.
Well, I've learned a lot. One thing I'm still working on is the definition of privacy. I think we need to find that. Well, I think that a couple of things that I've learned here today. I mean, one is there's a great demand for data, the high demand product. I don't care how you look at it, our data, but we found out that, hey, people need data. They always want data. It seems like it's going to be critical to determine who owns that, who has that data, who's going to maintain that data, who's going to protect that data, and then who's going to determine how it's going to be used to benefit folks like Laurie. I think that's a major challenge for this group and this effort going forward. From a NASS perspective, I think we'll continue to do what we do. We like to make use of other sources of information just to reduce the burden on people like Carl there, who said he's done inundated with surveys. It's not all NASS. Everybody's trying to collect data from farmers. If it was just NASS, you'd probably have no problem, but everybody's collecting data. So that's a huge challenge. And these things are important, but I just think we're going to have those challenges in determining who owns that data, who collects it, who's going to maintain it, who's going to determine how it's used going forward.
All right, thanks. Laurie?
How do we use the data we have better to improve productivity? And then what data do we need to help farmers into the future?
And I introduced you least but not last, but now you're last.
Yeah.
You're both, right, least and last.
I think it's a very complicated thing. My dad used to say something about however fast you run at the horizon, it retreats at the same pace. And so we're kind of at that point with data and advancements, but there's also a big difference between value and price and cost. And so I hardly ever hear a farmer say, man, I wish I had paid for that extension information I got for free. Or, gosh, I really wish I had paid for the information I got on inflation rates over NPR for free. And so it's complicated. This is not a position I'm taking. I just think that when there are certain things where it's difficult to contain the boundary of value, you shouldn't expect every transaction to be a one-off price this or that. And so a lot of farmer data is available through multiple means. I can either have you send me your machine data or I can look at it from the sky. And they're both going to be observed with error. And until I aggregate them across experience and think about the changing technology in which it's interpreted, it doesn't actually have much value. So the value chain is happening. Some of it is for public goods, some of it is private. And because they're mixed, we don't have simple pricing mechanisms. If they're all self-containable and if everybody's farm was so unique, then you would have individual yield monitored data markets or something. I pay you $12 for that. But we don't. And I think the question is using it intelligently, advancing it, and not wasting some opportunities like might exist from aggregating data that have been collected for a long period of time. NASS is the most critical to researchers. And NASS and ERS are unbelievably critical. If any of that went away, public research would just dry up. At the same time, we're doing really good work with precision data from individual farms and getting better prescriptions for conservation impacts and so on. And that's all evolving. And 10 years from now, we're going to look at this moment in time and think we were silly. We're so trivial. All we did was a few hundred terabytes a day. Come on. That's all happening on your cell phone. So I think we shouldn't get too proud of ourselves or despondent, either one, about our lack of complete use of the data sets we have now. It'll continue to get better, but the data sets are going to explode, kind of Moore's law and the generation of data as well. And it's the intelligent use of them and using them for things that have mixed public and private goods that makes all of these issues so complicated and interesting.
All right, I have a few closing comments, but first join me in giving the panel a round of applause. That was a good inaugural event for the Agree discussion series. Great discussion, questions. So just a couple of reminders. We do have 2 more events scheduled, one on September 27th, same timing, 11:30 to 1 with food for 1:30, food available. That one is harnessing big data for small farmers. On November 8th, we're going to talk about many of the issues that Kevin touched on around innovation, agriculture, data collection, management, analysis. Doug Lawrence, who formerly worked in our NRCS, and Bill Salas from Geo Solutions are leading the development of a paper that will be released before that event. And then we have a series of topics that we'll be scheduling events over the course of the late fall and early 2019. So I encourage you to come back and bring your colleagues and help us get the word out about these series. I'd like to thank you for coming. There is still food available for those of you who didn't get enough to eat or didn't grab food beforehand. And as this was our first event, if you have any feedback for us on ways that could be improved, grab a member of the Agree team. We'd love to hear what you thought worked well and what could be done better. And if you'd like to learn more about the Agree Task Force on Conservation Crop Insurance, again, grab any of the Meridian Agree team members who are here. Again, thanks to our panel members, and feel free to linger here in the room if you'd like to stick around. Thank you.